In an age of dwindling free speech rights, the lawyers of Ontario have struck a blow for free speech. The Law Society of Ontario benchers voted this week to scrap a provision of their code of conduct, their professional standards that required all lawyers and paralegals in Ontario to sign off on a statement of principles affirming support for diversity, equity, inclusion, tolerance, all of these other things. Now, this was put into effect 2 years ago, and there's nothing wrong with diversity, inclusion, or tolerance, but there is something profoundly wrong with compelled speech, which is what it is when you force someone to say something, when you force someone to literally have words affirming values they may not have, and you make that a requirement to practice law. Now, this is now gone. There was actually a hostile takeover of the Law Society of Ontario. The bencher elections just a few months ago elected a slate of candidates that all shared one common goal, which was scrapping the SOP. Now, what this means is that lawyers no longer have to say something basically to keep their jobs, to maintain their right to practice law. But it wasn't just about practicing lawyers. Even retired lawyers or people who are licensed as lawyers but not working in law were required to have one of these statements of principles in order to maintain their licensing and membership by the Law Society of Ontario. So what removing this means is that lawyers who are supposed to uphold the Constitution, which includes an unbridled right to free expression, are not forced to take a particular position, which is ideological and has absolutely nothing to do with the law or the rule of law. Compelled speech is not free speech. It's one thing to censor, which is egregious on its own, but to force people to toe a party line is communist. It's Marxist. There's no way about that. But we live in an age where it's not just enough to not say the wrong thing. You now have to say what the Politburo and the intelligentsia say is the right thing. And again, I want to go back to this. There is nothing wrong with a lawyer, a law firm, a group of lawyers saying we stand up for equality, we stand up for multiculturalism, towing whatever identity politics line they want to. But forcing people to do this as though it is somehow going to combat inequality when there's no evidence of that is just plain wrong. And it's good that the lawyers of Ontario and the paralegals finally had a bencher election that revealed there was an appetite to fight back against this, although institutions like the Law Society of Ontario are subject to this. These groups are given monumental power by the government. They have a monopoly on determining who gets to practice in a particular field, whether it's a college of physicians and surgeons, the Law Society, or other regulatory colleges that oftentimes are able to operate without guaranteeing constitutional freedom of speech. So it's a victory for the time being, but one on which we have to be on guard for future encroachments and future incursions. If lawyers who are supposed to uphold constitutional liberties are not granted them, what hope is there for the rest of the country? This is what we need to stand up for. This is why free speech is so important and why, of course, it cannot be taken for granted. For True North, I'm Andrew Lawton.